Okay, it's 10 after the appointed hour. I'd like to reconvene the special meeting of the Trinidad City Council, and in particular, the Trinidad City Council sitting in our capacity as the Ethics Hearing Board. Non-disqualified members, Grego, myself, Lopez, and Goodall may remain at the dais. Joe, if you will excuse yourself, as is Councilwoman Miles. Councillor Downs will read the complaint. Councillor.
Okay, thank you. And for the record, I would like to say also that you, Councilman Matei, are the senior-most non-recused council member, and that is why you are now presiding over this hearing. And I just wanted that for the record.
Thank you.
Okay, absolutely, thank you. The complaint. Councilman Joe Bonato complains against Mayor Phil Rico according to the Trinidad Code of Ordinances and states the following. 1. I am the liaison for Trinidad City Council to the military and to Fort Carson and to Pinion Canyon Maneuver Site. I have been appointed liaison by the city. 2. The mayor came to me recently and told me that he has appointed members, that's a typo, but members to a committee that deals with Fort Carson. The mayor took this upon himself to do this according to what he told me. 3. The mayor did not involve city council in this matter. Again, the mayor has acted and done things without telling or involving Trinidad City Council. 4. The mayor not only formed the committee from his own admission, but he also decided who he would appoint, again, without the involvement of City Council. 5. This violates the Trinidad Ethics Code and Code of Ethics, Section 2-71, subparagraph 4, that says the council will speak with one voice. The mayor has been previously warned about this by council as well. Sworn to and signed by Joe Bonato.
Mr. Mayor, do you understand the complaint as has been presented?
Yes, sure do.
Do you admit or deny the allegations contained therein?
Deny.
Okay. Why don't we have those who are potential witnesses, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Bonato, and Ms. Miles, stand and be sworn?
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Moving along, Mr. Bonato, you are the complaining party, and you are now called upon to present your case, and you must present it to our satisfaction by preponderance of the evidence. Do you understand?
Yes.
Present your case, sir.
She just kind of feels funny before you should
You
stand
need to
by
lift
her.
that.
Yeah.
There's a button on the side to lift the thing.
Oh man, there's all kind of buttons.
The one that says up. The other way. Is that helpful?
That's good. Thank you, Mr. T. I'd like to state my name. My name is Joe Bonato. First thing I'd like to say, I'm kind of disappointed that our city manager isn't here today. I knew there was some business he had to take care of, but this is a very important and serious matter that I believe all of us should have had a chance to listen to. So, you know, and also it's very discouraging to me when I'm downtown and walking through and I hear people talk about what happened at this meeting and what was going on at this meeting, and my question was, what meeting? So, with that said, can I call my witness, Mr. Dow?
You can. Yeah, I mean, you are, it's your case, and yes, if you want to give...
Call Council Member Michelle Miles because she was at this meeting and she was appointed to this board by the mayor. So there's just a couple questions I have for you, Council Member Miles. Thank you for being here. Okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. Did you ever ask or tell the mayor that city council should be involved in the decision to form a committee to deal with the military? If so, what were the mayor's comments?
Your statement is close, but what I said was that I guess after the second city council should be included in further discussions, and as I understand the mayor did do that.
That you understood
Well,
that the
his
mayor did
response to
that?
me was, I see your point. And we discussed whether there could be an executive session, in any case, whether or not there could have been, Mr. Rico, Mayor Rico, decided to go ahead and talk to people on a one-on-one basis.
Okay. Jerry, and if so, what were the mayor's comments?
I don't believe so. I wondered in my own mind why you weren't involved. I just assumed that he wanted my presence because there may have been some financial issues. When the first meeting was called, I had no idea what the subject of the meeting was. I knew it had to do with the military, and I asked if there was an agenda, and Mayor Rico said, no, just come to the meeting.
So what you're actually
That was the
telling,
first meeting.
okay, so what you're actually telling me, I only thought there was only one meeting that was conducted. Now I understand there was 2 meetings conducted. Thank
I'm
you.
sorry, one was small and another one was
But they were both
larger.
meetings,
They're both meetings.
Okay. Did you ever question the mayor's authority to form a committee such as this without city council's knowledge? And if so, what was the mayor's comment?
Before you filed your ethics complaint, I told you the following. I didn't view it as a committee. I viewed it, the first thing, as a meeting. The first meeting was just a meeting. I did not know if it was going anywhere. I wasn't asked to join the committee. I was asked to attend a meeting. And I thought it was going to be a very informal meeting because when I asked what it was about, I was told, just come and you'll see then. And then I found out the reason perhaps I wasn't told, where there were some confidentiality issues with some actions in Washington that breaking confidentiality
So-
might impact.
So my concern is this, Councilmember Miles, is that we have a mayor, like I said before in the other complaint, that doesn't know the charter. He doesn't know any rules or bylaws of any other boards he sits on. And you, especially you, Michelle, that is really so intelligent, you should know this charter.
Well, I'm
So
not
when
a child.
that, so,
No. Ask your
Okay.
question.
okay, well,
I will answer it if you want me to.
That
If you
was a
want me to,
question.
I will, 'cause
No.
it's-
We don't need to make comments
Okay.
to one's
All right.
educational level, just ask your question.
Well, that's all my opening questions have to be for my witness.
Okay, that's all the questions you have with.
Other words, when I get my closing argument
Since
and stuff.
something was
I will-
said about my knowledge of the charter, I know the charter quite well, and attending a meeting can't possibly be a violation of the charter in my
It's
estimation.
not, I'll read that to you later. Okay.
Now, if
Attending
you're
a meeting?
done,
I'm sorry.
if you're
This is
done
not
with
my turn.
Councilmember Miles, the mayor can ask her questions. Okay, does council have questions of her?
How long have you been the liaison for the?
Well, I don't think, you need to make yourself available again for questions from council, if you would please.
Yeah.
For now, I would suggest you may want to direct your questions to Councilmember Miles, since she's on the stand, if you don't.
Have you any questions, Councilman?
No.
Carlos?
I do. What was discussed in these meetings? You said the first 2 meetings.
The first meeting involved all Trinidad residents, and I couldn't tick off every person there, but I would estimate there were perhaps 10 people. And what was discussed was, among other things, ways to get the military more engaged in our community and involved in our economy. And there was some notion that there might be an opportunity to increase maneuvers at Pinyon Canyon for a variety of reasons, one of which might involve increasing or possibly could go the other way with the sequester and all, decreasing the population of Fort Carson. And not that we would have anything to do with it, but if the federal government decided to do that, how could matters work to the best interest of Trinidad? That was the first meeting, and then I
Okay.
became aware.
Okay. In the second meeting?
The second meeting, there must have been more than 20. It was at least double the size. It was pretty much the same people from Trinidad, but there was also a general and a colonel and a number of other, I guess it seemed like they were mostly staff members for the general and the colonel, but it could have been personnel people who I wouldn't know who would report to that.
Sure, I would say.
Let's continue up here. First of
Well,
all,
I said,
get right back to it.
please. Thank you.
And then you said for the first meeting it was the majority of locals from Trinidad,
That's correct.
and then the second meeting was more people, including military factions from Fort Carson.
Yeah, it was very high level. I mean, the
Okay,
design
and you
general
made a
was there.
comment earlier that there was some type of a, sorry, you had signed some form of secrecy or something like that, or or there was
No.
some type of confidentiality. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, we were told to, in particular, keep this confidential because it might somehow impact decisions made at Washington if it sort of got out into the wind, if you will. And that was my sense that those specific words were said.
Told at what time, which meeting, and by whom?
That became apparent during the first meeting.
And who made the comment to keep this on a down low?
It seemed to me there was a consensus. I mean, I didn't participate in the decision, but there was consensus, and it certainly included Mayor Rico.
Okay.
Mr.
Are you,
Just a second.
are you questions?
Oh, yeah.
And I just added at the time, I did sympathize with the need because of, I really was kind of reeling a little bit. It was like, how do you trade off decisions made in Washington versus whatever else is going on in Trinidad? And I remember just sort of going along with the flow.
And my last question for you is, how was the reception taken at the second meeting when you had the additional factions from Fort Carson there?
How was the reception taken?
From the general public from Trinidad? The participants in the meeting?
Oh, I'm just.
I mean, I'm asking, can you tell me what was discussed? I'm trying to allude to that, but, and since you said it was confidential.
Was discussed, involved staffing at Fort Carson, and whether it was going to increase or whether it was going to decrease, and if it were going to increase, was there a way that it could work to the benefit of the city of Trinidad?
And one last question, I'm sorry. Did you ever happen to ask the mayor, was anyone else asked to attend this meeting from city council?
I don't recall. I guess at the time I assumed that you can't have more than 3 city council members attend the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I assumed that his first pick would have been Councilman Bonato, but there was a reason for picking me, as it may have had to do with some financial matters, which I have some sophistication in. So that's what I remember concluding. But I never asked. I assumed that the reason there were not 3 people there was that it would be an open meetings violation. Not the general public. The
Right,
general
I mean,
public wasn't posted. It was a small group of people from Trinidad.
So it was a kind of a secret meeting then, so to speak? Regarding, especially with
Well,
the confidentiality?
It wasn't in the newspaper, but I think a lot of meetings aren't in the newspaper. And I don't mean to answer with an interpretation. I didn't think secrecy was the. I wasn't aware that it was confidential, and I was asked to join the first meeting. It became apparent during that first meeting that it was important because it might affect staffing decisions in Washington to keep it confidential. I wasn't entirely comfortable with that, but I wasn't entirely uncomfortable with it either. It was only after the second meeting that I grew uncomfortable when I saw how the group had expanded to just non-Trinidad people. I mean, how do you keep something confidential when I don't know, you're talking to like the personnel officer in the military?
Right.
I don't know. At that point is when and I don't want to over-answer the question, at that point, I had a conversation with the mayor, and it was not contentious at all. He said he agreed with me, and the measure that he elected to take was to, I think he thought it would be more personal would be to go to each council member individually and explain what's going on.
That's the last of my questions.
Mr. Goodall?
So I think my first question would be to the rest of city council. Were you contacted?
No, I was not.
I
Were
was
you
not.
contacted?
I was not either.
No,
I was not either.
Well, I was, okay, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I may have been mistaken in that. Maybe the issue, because I know this issue arose out of the mayor going to Councilman Bernal.
Right.
In the interest of keeping it on
I
track,
assume that
rather
meant
than
Councilman.
Right.
deliberate, can we confine your comments to questioning the witness?
So the first and second meeting both was by invite only,
That's correct.
and you were you were invited by the mayor.
I was invited by the mayor.
All right. I think that's all I have.
Give me just a minute. How many meetings were there so far as you were aware?
I attended two.
Two. Okay. Were there more?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
No.
Where were these meetings held?
They were held at, I think both were at the Pioneer Room.
At the college?
The second one was clearly, oh no, they were held at Pioneer Room, on Carmel.
In Mount Carmel? Okay. When were they held? In the day, night?
During the day.
During the day at Mount Carmel?
Right.
And you mentioned several local residents being in attendance. Who were they? So far as you were able to identify them, I know you know people.
No, I do.
Okay, who were they?
I don't, I'd have to sort of visually go around the room. I'll tell
Take
you
your-
the
take your
names off
time.
the top of my head.
Okay.
J.H. Meehan was there. Colonel Circleman was there. The mayor was there. Cy Michaels was there.
Wait. Okay. All right, I'm with you.
I was there. I'm trying to remember if anyone from staff was there. Those are the faces that come to mind.
Was Jay's daughter there, Gina?
Not to my memory, no.
Okay. You tell me there, what I understood you earlier to have said is there were as many as 10 people there, and you've named 5, including yourself, and the mayor.
Yeah, and I just don't remember. Remember, the meeting was not terribly significant to me, so I did not.
Understood.
You know, it's
No
not
roll was
basic
taken,
in my
nobody signed
memory.
in. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the discussion was kind of, it wasn't very deep.
Who was the chairperson, and who was the, who conducted the meeting?
It was not called to order or anything with a gavel, but
Understood.
I think the mayor.
Someone is
directed
obviously
the discussion.
bringing a group to a common goal.
Right, I think he directed discussion, but it was pretty freewheeling.
But when the invitation and the thanks for attending were given, it was the mayor who did that?
I believe so. I believe, to my memory, closing comments were made by the mayor.
Okay. How long did the meeting last? Both of them?
I would say the first one lasted approximately an hour,
Okay.
and the second one more like an hour and a half plus.
And in the second one, when the military personnel were present, how active were they in the discussion? Was it informative or was it dialogue?
It was a dialogue, but it mentioned that the mayor conducted the meeting. A lot of it, as you know,
Okay.
is habit, and I haven't, as an aside, I think it's good was to go around the room. So with a larger group attending, that explained a bit why it was.
So far as you're aware, in terms of the dialogue, was there any discussion or commitment about what the city expected or could offer?
No, there was not.
What was the general sense of the discussion?
The general sense was, how could we integrate the military more into citizens' life here, which would promote some sort of symbiosis, which they might it worked both of our advantages. And the idea was, well, we can do programs with kids, and they love talking to military men.
Sure.
I remember I brought up the issue of participation in the local economy, because when maneuvers occurred, it used to be that we saw quite a few people, going to restaurants and liquor stores. And then that had dried up with the sequester, that people weren't staying here for weekends or whatever, and then I was told I was wrong about that, but regardless of those type of things, it was, how can we get more involved in the community, and how can we promote Trinidad's economy?
In your estimation, what was the intent and the spirit of one or both of these meetings? What were we hoping to accomplish aside from what you just said?
Better relationships between the Trinidad community and the military,
There was any,
and increased economic activity.
this is not an attack on one's patriotism or anything of the like, but the military can be a contentious situation
That was
with regard
discussed.
to the eastern part of the county. Was that part of the discussion?
It was.
Because it was prominently noted in local newspapers.
Right, the not 1 acre more
Yeah.
was discussed in the context of, this has nothing to do with not 1 acre more. And if this proceeds in any fashion, it will be important to have a campaign that puts the facts out before the rumors get going.
Okay, well, apparently that didn't happen. Was Lon Robertson in attendance?
I don't know who that is.
He is the proponent of not one more acre in the whole
He was not.
opposition caucus. Nobody represented the eastern part of the county in that capacity. Okay, thank you.
I have one question, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Was there anything said at the meeting, Michelle, that would indicate who spearheaded or organized these two meetings?
Speak up. Can't hear you.
Was there anything mentioned at these meetings who actually organized?
There wasn't, but it came away with the sense that the military did.
The military did.
Well,
And I could be wrong about that, but that was.
Yeah, I just
my
doubt,
recollection.
your opinion.
Right.
okay,
Well,
Council.
then we're just asking an opinion, and that's allowed?
That's my.
You just allowed it, right?
I'm asking her what her
Right, but I'm
sense
just saying,
of.
No,
just your opinion comment was just made.
I did.
So I wanna know, just your opinion. Vince, we're gonna go there. Is it your opinion that city council, whether we were all at the meeting or not, should have been informed?
I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable answering that question. I'm a fact witness.
Okay.
I'm not an opinion witness.
All right.
And if I misspoke when I spoke to
I
Ms.
just
Griego,
asked- yeah.
I said that was my recollection.
Okay.
Okay, I
All
was
right.
recounting my recollection.
I understand where you're going, but
All
that
right.
can come later.
All right.
Your question was, who initiated this meeting?
Right.
I
Right.
got it. Councilman Bernardo, you may continue.
Do you have other questions?
You had other questions of Michelle, did you?
Oh, no more questions.
Okay, anybody else have any discussion to have with Councilwoman Miles?
I'm good.
You are dismissed, ma'am, thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, do you have any other questions?
No, I should have asked him. I apologize.
No, not at all. No, I just want to make sure.
Okay, have you anyone else to present testimony or serve as witness?
No, sir.
You are done.
Anything else you would like to say? I'm sorry, I don't mean to.
There's a lot of things I gotta say, but
Well, not argument, but in terms of evidence, comments on what you say are the facts.
I'm just looking at you.
Okay, understand, I understand your comments are gonna reserve for a closing situation, is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That moves us next to, Mr. Mayor.
This is not going to be as long as the other one, just to let you know. It's very short, actually. You know, we talked about the ethics issue, what it means and all this stuff earlier. But this ethics complaint involves 3 issues. Did I act on my own? Does Trinidad have a designated liaison? And was I warned?
I'm sorry?
Or was I warned?
Warren.
Okay. Did I act on my own? Yes, I did. I did act on my own. I did it for the betterment of the betterment of Trinidad, to continue a good neighbor relationship between Fort Carson and Trinidad. Enhancing this relationship with the community support will benefit the city of Trinidad in the long run. There is nothing in the Code of Ethics that mentions acting alone. Item number 2, Does Trinidad have a designated liaison to Fort Carson? During my 2.5 years as mayor, we have not had a designated liaison. I have confirmed this to Audra, city manager, city clerk. The last liaison, from my understanding, was around 2010, which was Colonel Lewis Implement. He was the actual liaison. Item number 3, was I warned? No, I was not warned. Earlier, I was exonerated from the Goodall claim. So this claim should actually be omitted because, that there was not a warning actually given. As I mentioned earlier, speaking with one voice.
I can't stop you there. I'm hard to make a connection between this one and the previous one. That's
Other
totally
than the
inappropriate.
war.
The two are not related, they're divorced.
Yeah.
Now when you identify warned by whom about what?
It's right here. It's in Joe's.
Okay, I stand corrected, proceed.
Okay. So I was not warned, okay? As I mentioned earlier, speaking with one voice, and I'm not sure if you guys want to stop me or not. We've all acted on our own in many times. There's been several of us that have done this in the past. That is something that I think we as council people do sometimes. We go out and we talk to people, we make some split decisions, which has been evident in the past. We've all done that. Maybe not Mr. Goodall or maybe not Ms. Grego because they're new on council, but those of us that have been on council for a long time, we've made some decisions on our own. I question about these ethics charges. If they go, there's so many of these things on that we've all acted on our own. Could it go back to each one of us? So there's an issue there across the board that I think we've all experienced. These type of ethics charges could go on for a long time and disrupt the entire constituent staff, and we'll have every reason to question our ability to govern ourselves, and most importantly, if we have the best interest in our community, or are we self-serving. I feel this ethics charge is exactly as the previous one. I'm not going to mention that. And I feel that this second ethics charge is only filed to harass and try to embarrass me. In summation, I am asking, and I'll question this, and hopefully that you two will be honest, that I'm asking Council Goodall and Lopez to recuse themselves from the proceedings due to the previous proceeding that we just had. Because I feel that because of some of the information I brought forward, that they may not be able to sit and judge me without prejudice. That's my question. That's my
Stand by. Need some direction with regard to the mayor's claim as to Councilman Goodall Lopez.
Understood, and I will say that there having been 2 ethics complaints and one heard previously does not cause them to have a conflict in this case. It's inconvenient, I understand that, but it doesn't rise to the level of them having a conflict in this matter.
Okay.
So, thank you, Mayor.
They are 2 separate and distinct occurrences,
Right.
and so far you are the only one to marry the 2.
Okay.
Any questions of the mayor, beginning with you, Councilman Goodall?
So, were these meetings initiated to you by the military?
There was a combination of 2 people. First of all, it was initiated, I had conversations with the military, but I also had some through Mr. Chimino.
So Mr. Chimino contacted you about a meeting he wanted to get held, and then you coordinated that?
Well, what it was is through combination between him and the Fort Carson people, we coordinated the meeting.
So initially, Mr. Chimino contacted you, or the military? Which one?
I think it was Mr. Chimino that contacted me first.
All right. So at any point through this, did you think maybe you should have had conversations with all of council instead of assigning one person from council and going forward.
Okay, I brought this up with our city manager, because I did want to bring it up to the entire city council.
Is it
And I was
appropriate to
advised-
discuss this when the city manager isn't here to refute or
I
to
would think not.
approve this?
I think it's appropriate to allow it.
Okay, I'm just worried.
Under the circumstances.
And I was advised that this,
If I understand the question, Councilman Goodall is trying to find out how this developed, and the mayor is attempting to explain.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm on the same page.
We are.
Okay, thank you.
I had wanted to bring this to the entire council, but I asked if this falls under the executive session guidelines. And I was told no,
By whom?
by the city manager.
Okay, that's a matter for a different time.
Correct.
But you were dissuaded from that.
Yes.
That's interesting.
So do you make it a habit of going to the city manager for guidance on what you should talk to city council about before we, on matters?
Well, I think that's the proper procedure, because, you know, he's the person that's on the ground every day. And it's just like him and the previous city manager that we had, we always sat down together, just like every one of us sits down on a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis, and have discussions with him. And I use him to guide me in many times, in many decisions that come up, or items of discussion that come up. I think it's a proper procedure.
Alrighty. I'm good.
Mr. Lopez?
I'm looking at the complaints here from Mr. Bonato. Actually, can I refrain my questions till the end?
Sure.
I want to calculate this correctly and say it correctly.
Okay. At the end, you're meaning during
After-
discussion?
During
Or-
this portion right here now.
Okay, I got
Yes.
you. Okay.
I'd like to yield
We're
my time to
skipping.
you, if you will.
You're skipping.
Yes, I'd like to.
Okay. All right. Mayor, did, any time during any of these two meetings, did you indicate to this group of people that you were representing the city of Trinidad?
No, I did not.
And another question, why did you ask Councilwoman Miles to participate?
The reason being is I felt like we needed someone else on the council to be participant.
No specific reason?
No specific reason other than that.
All right, Mr. Lucas?
I think you asked my question. You never once thought to like just notify us, hey, we're gonna have this meeting? I mean, I know you said you discussed that with the city manager and he advised you not to, but nothing in your mind ever said, you know, maybe I should let the other council members know about this meeting. Because when did this meeting occur again?
I don't know the exact date that it happened. I really don't have that down.
Let me see if I have here.
Probably, look at my calendar.
Do you have an approximate date? When was it? Like January?
Oh,
or?
no. It was some more like probably June. I'm guessing
So
June.
like 2 months, 2.5
Oh, yeah.
months ago, when you had this meeting. And you never thought of it to ask the rest of the council?
The biggest question I had is how do I inform city council? How do I inform this without it creating an open records type thing and having more than 3 people? And that was the big question that I had. How do I do this?
And was the secrecy or the confidentiality asked upon by Mr. Chimino or the military? Who asked for that confidentiality?
Well, we was a discussion between pretty much the military and myself.
So that was after the fact of you having this first meeting.
Yes.
So with that being said, you didn't know that this was going to have to be a confidential meeting before it was had.
The reason for the confidentiality, and I think it was mentioned earlier, is that any time that you bring up information about Fort Carson, the not one more acre group, right away questions what's happening, as noted in the newspaper.
As is their right.
And
Exactly.
you're right, it is right, yeah. And there is a big question lying on the table, which every one of us knows right now, there's a brigade that is potentially, it's an armored brigade that's to be brought to Fort Carson. They could also lose an additional group of people, around 4,000 troops. And the reason why we wanted to try to keep this quiet somewhat was so that, because see, Fort Riley, Kansas also wants this armored division to go there, which would take not only that 800 troops, but also the other 4,000 people, or 4,000 troops, which equates to about 8,000 people out of Colorado Springs. So Fort Riley is really trying to take it away from Trinidad, or from Fort Carson. So that was the big reason behind it.
So with that being said, this sounds more like a Fort Carson issue than a Trinidad issue. Is that correct?
The biggest thing for this, the big reason for the meeting was, how do we support Fort Carson? We need to develop a better relationship and continue a good relationship with Fort Carson, because I believe that it would benefit us economically.
I would think that having the no more acre people there would help with your cause, or for the group.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a statement I'm making. I think that, anyway, that's the last of my questions.
Councilmember Tate, may I follow up with one question?
Quickly,
So we get updates regularly from the city manager on your behalf and everything else that violates absolutely nothing. That's what I find weird, is that we didn't receive that on this. This is a big deal. It'd be like negotiations going on the land purchase up there and us being told afterwards. This is along the same lines. We get updates regularly that violate absolutely nothing from the city manager through you to each of us, because you can't contact us. And that's what I find odd, is that on this one that did not.
is that a question or statement?
Do you not find that odd that we couldn't follow the same channels as regularly to notify us? You said you didn't know how to do this without violating the sunshine laws when we receive these updates regularly.
You know, I've just recently started to give you guys regular updates, which I think you've always seen.
Yes.
Which I think that is something that I will continue to do. And that's something that has to happen, and maybe it did. Maybe I should have done it back then. Like I said, did I act on my own? Yes, I did.
I'm happy with that.
I have several questions. Who was present? Jay Chimino, Lou Simpleman, you, Cy, and Michelle.
There was a general in Fort Carson.
At the first meeting?
No, at the first meeting, there was only city people.
Well, who are the city people I'm asking?
There was myself, there was Cy Michaels, there was Michelle, I'm trying to think who else was in there.
If you will, while he's thinking, I thought of one more.
Yeah.
Greg was there.
Oh, really?
Greg was there.
That's interesting.
Greg was there. There was only 6 people actually from the city there at the time. Trying to think who the other 2 people were. I don't remember the other 2 people.
Okay. You earlier testified that there was a meeting of the minds between Fort Carson, some non-specified individual. Who called? Who was your contact early on at Fort Carson?
My initial contact was through his executive assistant.
Who's his? The general?
The general's assistant.
The general who directs Fort Carson
Yes.
had an assistant
Yes.
working together
Yes.
with you and Jay
Right.
Tremaine. Okay, so my next question is this. Did you answer a phone or did you make a call?
I answered the call.
And who called you?
She did. The
Okay,
lady did.
as directed by?
Evidently through the general, evidently.
Could you say what channel?
General George.
General
Okay.
George
Yeah.
had his assistant contact you
We contacted
to
him.
tell you that,
That we were just to try to assemble a group of people, that we were assembling a group of people to how to better promote Fort Carson.
okay. That begs the question is, how was the city of Trinidad, all 8,400 residents, in your opinion, going to influence the military's decision to keep things status quo at Fort Carson as compared to moving that brigade and others to Fort Riley? How could we influence a military
Well,
decision?
let me address a little bit, the letter that we had signed off on to send to Fort Carson. When Greg went to Washington DC.
Okay,
From my understanding, that when they received that letter, they felt like there was a very big influence as to moving forward.
okay. Moving back to where we were. The general's assistant contacted you,
Yes.
and then these other people got assembled. Whose idea was it to assemble these particular people? I know, or we know, that you invited
It
Michelle.
was mine,
How did Cy get there?
to my invitation,
And you selected her because?
as a community member.
Okay, how did you select Lou Simple?
As a community member as well, and he's been, involved with the military for
Okay,
many
and how
years.
did you select Jay?
Jay actually said originally contacted me.
Well, Jay contacted you before the military?
Um,
You told me that this thing began when the when the
let me-
general assistant called you.
Okay, Jay had some suggestions. So
To
then,
whom?
to me, some suggestions.
Before or after you got the call from the general's assistant?
That was before,
Interesting.
okay? And
Continue.
then afterwards, like I said, the contact was made from the general's office to me.
So Jay, as I'm understanding what you just said, facilitated communication between the general's assistant and you.
That's correct.
And he had her, a female presumably, reach out to call your cell phone.
Yes.
Okay. The meetings were held at Mount Carmel?
Mount Carmel, yes.
Interesting. We're painfully trying to go, what role does the influence of the Trinidad Community Foundation have in your decision process to host this meeting?
None.
Thank you. Okay, what was your objective other than to try and influence the military to stay here and not go to Fort Riley?
Well, the big decision on this was to try, like I mentioned, was to better, like I mentioned to create, let's see, for the community, for us as a community group, to add additional support for Fort Carson. That was really the big idea behind this thing.
And you are aware that the community in a larger context does not wholeheartedly and blindly support the military.
Oh, I agree with that, yeah.
And how is it that you decided to exclude that faction from this meeting?
I have, as you well know, where I used to work.
Right?
I talked to many, many people,
Understood.
and their support, the vast majority of the people that I have ever spoken to, support the military. There are a few that dissent on that. I understand that. And I know some of those people.
Okay, so you, initially, as I'm understanding what you're just saying, if I can interpret that, I'm testifying, not asking, but you had a meeting of like-minded persons at this juncture in time.
The other person in there, by the way, was Ed Trommeter, just let you know.
And how was he selected?
I selected him.
Well, why?
Because I felt like he is a very, he's a very broad-minded person, the way he looks at the community.
Okay. My question originally was, were you trying to circumvent council? But I think you've answered that because you were saying you were trying to avoid an open records meeting. What's the problem with an open records meeting? We have them all the time.
Well, I guess the reason was that we did not want the one more acre to cause an uprising.
This right.
And that was weird.
I'm sorry?
And that was kind of the biggest reason.
Do you have any thoughts about having chosen that path?
Other than what's happened in the past, other than history with all that, the history behind it.
Okay, well, Lon Anderson got a hold of this, or Lon Robertson got a hold of it somehow, and it was in the National World Journal.
Yeah.
So it wasn't so a big secret.
Well, I have thoughts about it.
I'm understanding how all of this developed. I think Jay suggested that prepare yourself for a call from the general's assistant because we're going to have this meeting of like-minded people to generate community support for the military to try and keep an entire brigade and other personnel at Fort Carson as compared to having them go to Fort Riley, thinking that probably the folks at Fort Riley were doing the same damn thing as we're trying to do, right? Okay, And you, in the interest of economic development for the city of Trinidad, thought that that was really a good idea and a method to proceed?
Yes,
Okay, you've already explained why you thought it was a good idea not to inform council, and that's because of the whole open records thing. Did you not feel full of yourself acting on behalf of the city of Trinidad alone, well, with Michelle as collateral support, I would
I
suspect?
didn't say that, I can't say that I felt foolish.
Not foolish, full of yourself.
No, I didn't feel like I was full of myself. No, I
Okay.
did not.
All right,
That is something that I never do.
okay, and there were a total of 3 meetings?
No, 2.
2 meetings. And what was the conclusion developed by these 2 meetings?
The first meeting basically was just to get together the local people, to see who we were.
Hors d'oeuvres and drinks and
I
coffee
don't
and
remember if we had hors
cookies?
d'oeuvres or not, I don't
Okay.
remember. The second meeting, like I said, was when the contingent came down from Fort Carson.
Okay,
And the overall emphasis on that meeting pretty much was like what Michelle Ismail said, was to support, gain additional support for Fort Carson.
do you believe you completed your objective?
I do.
In light of all the bad press? Is the general aware that you have an ethics violation for having
Yes, he
conducted
does.
this meeting?
Yes, he does.
That kind of flies in the face of what you were trying to accomplish, I would think, but that's not a question. In retrospect, do you see any of this as a difficulty or a problem?
Oh, yeah, now I can see it.
And what is it?
Sure. The problem is, goes back to, how do I include, and of course, Mr. Goodall also brought it up, how do I let everybody know without creating an open record thing?
Well, the open records thing is not anything that we need to be afraid of. We have open record meetings
Sure.
all the time. This is one.
Right.
And this is awkward and embarrassing for all of us, not just you. Okay, did you, or when, is a better way, when did you see this as a potential for concern?
I would say probably after the second meeting.
And what course of action did that influence you to take?
We have not had any further meetings.
Do
We
you
have
have
further
intentions
contacts.
of having additional meetings?
You know, I had mentioned this, that when the decision is when this decision is made by Washington, whether the Fort Carson gets abrogated or not, that when all that was said and done, that I would bring it forward completely to city council in an open meeting like this.
Really? What is Colorado Springs, so far as you know, doing to support the military to keep that brigade and additional personnel in the Springs?
They're doing everything they can.
What do you know?
The reason why I know is by
No, not why. What do you know that they are doing?
there is a support group in Colorado Springs, and they're very active.
Okay. Are you aware that the city manager works for us?
Mm-hmm.
We don't work for him.
Right.
And he is not part of this elected board. Do you agree?
I agree.
But yet you chose them to seek the counsel of the city manager in making this decision to meet with the military and circumvent the rest of us. Can you explain how that came to your mind to be a good idea?
Well, actually, right now, it probably wasn't a good idea.
Thank you. That's the right answer, as I'm looking for them. Do you think it would have been better to tell all of us, I and one of you, presumably Michelle, because I have selected her, am going to meet with a local group, oddly comprised of members primarily of the Community Foundation, but I'll give you that. Wait, I'll give you that, and that was inappropriate, I shouldn't have said that, okay? I'm going to meet with the military, but rather than have a problem in a big open meeting and raise the ire of the not one more acre people, let's just do this and then I'll report back. Did that occur to you? Why the big secrecy? I didn't know a damn thing about it until it all exploded.
Mm-hmm.
And how did Councilman Bernardo find out about it?
I went to him.
Why did you go to him?
I went to him, and he was pretty upset. Because, okay, let me mention this to you. He has always been involved with Fort Carson.
Understood.
Okay. I did not select him for the reason being, as we all know, that he was going through surgery at the time. So what I said, and I thought that after this is all said and done, that I would approach him and explain to him everything that was going on.
After the fact.
After the fact, which I did. When I actually went to his home and I talked to him. And what he did is basically, he exploded.
Do you have any thoughts about that?
Other than he said his feelings got hurt.
Well, there's a phrase, better to ask permission as opposed to beg forgiveness. Perhaps you should have spoken to him first, before you did this, rather than do it. And he said, guess what I did?
Mm-hmm.
And when were you going to talk to the rest of us? You have yet to speak to any of us. Well, then of course this turned into a hearing and you couldn't talk to us, I understand that. What was your plan to include the rest of us after the fact?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, is when that decision was made at the Washington level, that we would have a complete discussion. And I'll be honest with you, what I did is just 2 weeks ago, and I asked Les if that would have been an executive session item. And he did clarify that it could have been done.
What?
And I mean, these are just questions that I came up with that.
It seems to me that if it's big enough to be a secret and important enough to have a general come to Trinidad, and I was working at the courthouse when the Undersecretary of the Army came to address the not one more acre people. It was a big deal, and it continues to be a big deal. We have a general coming, and we're supposed to meet in a secretive fashion. It was that big a deal, but yet you thought it better to talk to the city manager than the rest of us. Explain that to me, justify that for me if you will.
I mentioned it to the city manager because I wanted to talk to him just about just to let him know what was going on.
And what did he tell you? It's hearsay, I
To
understand.
be honest with you, I don't remember. I'll be honest, I don't remember.
Did you leave with the sense that you had his blessing to proceed?
No, I did not agree with that.
Did he tell you to not do it?
He did not say anything.
He offered you no opinion one way or the other,
No opinion.
but you chose to do it again,
Right.
on your own anyway,
Yes, I did.
with little or no regard for the rest of us. Is that true?
I can't say without no regard for you guys,
But you did it anyway.
but I did do it.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have one more. Is this the first time you've gone to the city manager to ask his opinion if you should talk to council about an important matter?
The only other matter that came up was way back when we started talking about the Fisher's Peak, which was brought to council, and we've had discussions on that.
Thank you, sir.
I have one last question for you. I understand you didn't want to, discuss this with Mr. Bernardo because of his surgeries that were going on and his physical state, but why did you not choose to call him, at least notify him that this was going on, and maybe later he could be brought in? I mean, he still probably could have received a phone call.
That's probably true, that he could have probably received a call, but if I would have brought him in afterwards, then we would have 3 people at a meeting, which creates an issue.
But you didn't know what his time frame for PT or physical therapy would be completed, did you?
Well, it was going on pretty much the same time when he had just had his surgery.
Right.
Okay.
So.
And the meetings were going on at that time.
Right, I understand that, but you knew that. I wasn't a part of this council when Mr. Bernardo states that he was appointed by Mr. Riorda to be the liaison to the military in Pino Canyon. But I still know that even in an unofficial capacity, he is still our biggest military supporter on this dais, in my opinion. I'm just kind of wondering why you didn't even call him to tell him, hey, I understand you're going through the surgery. I want to let you know what's going on. Can you explain to me why you didn't call him?
In retrospect, I should have called him. And I'm sorry I didn't. As a matter of fact, I apologize for that yet I talked to him.
Okay. That's all I have.
Do you have any other witnesses you'd like to present?
I don't have any.
Do you have any other comments?
I'll wait for my closing.
Okay? You rest your case at the moment. Any questions, Mr. Bernardo, Mr. Mayor, at this point? Okay. I guess we move now to closings.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And Mr. Bernardo goes first.
That's correct.
Complainant.
That's correct.
The floor is yours, Mr. Bernardo.
Thank you, sir. Well, first of all, I'd like to say I'm really shocked that there was 2 meetings. I only knew of 1 meeting. 1 meeting. And with the people that were supposedly appointed by the mayor, with 90% of the foundation, the Trinidad Community Foundation. Those were the people that were at this meeting, okay? So, the next thing I'd like to say, Mr. Riordan did report, as I was the liaison for the city of Trinidad. I gotta say, I love our military. I would never go against our military and what they do for our nation. This isn't Washington, D.C. This isn't Baltimore, Maryland, where we have FBI agents and CIA agents that have to meet in secrecy because to protect our country. This is Trinidad, Colorado. 10,000 people. 10,000 people. And yet, the mayor's right. When he came over to my house and tried to explain things to me, I did go. And I had a good reason to go. When he came to me and said, Joe, I appointed a committee to represent the city of Trinidad for Fort Carson and Pinon Canyon. Yeah, I did that. I asked the mayor, I said, Mr. Rico, who's on this committee? Just like it was reported. Jay Chimino, Ed Trometer, Louis Simpleman. These are all guys that are involved with the Trinidad Community Center, which he sits as a board member. Okay? So, like I said at the beginning, it's really tough for me to stand up here and say that I'm not the liaison for the city of Trinidad. I worked the last 4 or 5 years, Karen, with Fort Carson, and I became very close with Fort Carson. I could tell you generals all down the line. I could tell you colonels' names that I was involved with. True enough, I could hardly walk. But how many times did I miss a meeting up at Fort Carson? 1 time. And that's 1 time I asked this mayor, are you going to this meeting? He said, yeah, I'm going. I said, do you mind if I get a ride with you? And you know what he told me? Well, I'm staying with my daughter, so you can't. Okay? But other than that, is like I see, when the mayor appointed this committee, it was really shocking to me. He didn't even, like Carlos Lopez said here, he didn't even contact me. True enough, I did have my surgery. But in any kind of general respect, as a liaison for this city, he should have had the common knowledge to say, Mr. Bernardo, would you like, but he didn't. Then when I get 3 phone calls from Colorado Springs, and I'm not going to mention who their names were, calling me and saying, Mr. Bernardo, don't do this. Don't do this. Don't do this ethical violation. Why not? Because it's important. It's important. Sure, it's important. But I was elected by the people of this city to represent them, to give them the knowledge of what's going on in the city of Trinidad. And it's a situation that I really feel bad about when somebody has to call you to try to change your mind. I did talk, I'm going to say this, I did talk, Mr. Chimino called me. You know what he told me? This is hearsay, whatever you want to say. But on the phone, he tells me, Mr. Bonato, it was my fault. I appointed this committee. I wanted this meeting with the Army. Don't blame your mayor. And you know what I told him? I said, Mr. Camino, it's not your fault. I said, it's the fault of the mayor. Because he should have said absolutely not without informing this council. He didn't do that. But and I think a lot of Mr. Camino, don't get me wrong. But trying to put the blame on him when it was his fault that he didn't know the charter, he didn't understand what was corresponding up here. That's the mayor's fault. Mr. Camino also asked me, he said, Mr. Bonato, would you be willing to sit down with General George and myself at a meeting? You know what I told Mr. Camino? I said, Mr. Camino, you're getting yourself back in the same boat we're in. I said, I will discuss this. If you want me to do this, I will discuss this with council. And if one council member says no, it's no. Well, he never got back to me. But, like I say, you know, things have to try to be quiet. This is ridiculous. This is totally ridiculous. That we have to have secret meetings without our citizens knowing what's going on. There's a lot of times that I went downtown that I had to find out about meetings, and I'm like stupid because I'm sitting there, what meeting? What meeting are you talking about? Because we're not involved. We're not involved. This isn't the first time. 2-3 months ago, and maybe Mr. McKay might stop me, but he got upset because the letter was written to the Army without anybody on the council knowing. Well, that's a drop in the bucket compared to this. We're talking about bringing maybe 6,000 troops to Trinidad, bringing it down here at Pinyon Canyon, plus maybe another 4,000 people that has to be involved with 6,000 troops. We can't even take care of the population of Trinidad here with 10,000 people. How in the hell are we going to support that? Another thing I wanted to read, it's from the city charter. And if I could read this, Mr. McKay.
Your floor at the moment.
It says, no member of council shall vote on any questions on which he or she has a substantial personal or financial interest as determined by a majority of the council, other than common public interest or on any questions concerning his or her own conduct. And in said instances, the matter shall disclose the interest to the council. That's on page 13, 5.3 of our charter, which the mayor didn't know about. That's a good question. As I continue to follow up on this charter, on the oath of office, 5.15, it says, before entering upon the duties of his or her office, every council person, the mayor, city clerk, police chief, fire chief, city manager, judge, and city attorney shall subscribe before and file with the city clerk an oath of affirmation that he or she will support the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Colorado, this charter, and the ordinance of the city, and will faithfully perform the duties of the office. That's another thing that he didn't do. So the point of view is this, guys. It's very frustrating for me. Like I say, I stepped down from being the liaison for Fort Carson, and it's very frustrating. But the mayor has done this to us before. I have a lot of respect for Mr. Rico until this happened. And now knowing that there was 2 meetings, I didn't even know of the other meeting. That's really bothersome to me. So the point of view is that this mayor has to have transparency. If you don't believe in transparency, if he wants to go above us, well, this is our Bible. And I'm causing all of you to know this charter. And if they don't know the charter or the rules or regulations, then they shouldn't be sitting around that council seat. Mr. Mattia, I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
But I think this is a very, very serious matter that doesn't only deserve a slap on the hand. This deserves a lot of thinking and a lot of things that we could do here. The treaty involvement. And like I say, as far as the colonel and getting these phone calls, I think, and trying to change my votes on things, let it go another month till they count it. No. When I believe citizens of our city has to know what's going on, they have to know what's going on. So take it from there, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. You're done?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mayor Rico, concluding comment, statement?
First of all, I just want to say again, we have not had a liaison to Fort Carson. Mr. Bernardo is not it. It is not a perpetual position. Not since I've been here, anyway. I have not been appointed. Mr. Lopez, Mr. Goodall, no one has been appointed. I go to these meetings simply because they're available to me. I get information through Audra, through our Google Drive, saying that there's changes in leadership all the time. There's other things that are going on. There's meetings that are coming up. There was one this morning. The only 2 people that participated was Ms. Grego and myself. So, they're open. I have no personal interest, which it sounded like Mr. Bernardo was saying. He keeps bringing up this thing with the Trinidad Community Foundation, and I don't understand where he said the majority of the people on this committee were from the foundation. The only 2 people were myself and Colonel Lou Simperman. That's it. All the rest of the people were, like I said, are people outside of the foundation. So I don't even understand why the foundation has even been brought into this discussion. He brought up the fact about me not offering him a ride to Fort Carson for a meeting. That's craziness. I go up consistently to Denver to other meetings. I stay consistently with my daughter. I'm going there tonight because I have a meeting tomorrow morning. And I really am bothered that Mr. Bernardo thinks that none of us, especially me, that we don't know our charter. I've read the charter multiple times. So to say that I'm not aware of stuff in the charter, you know, that last part that he read about taking the oath, that's garbage. Because I take my oath very seriously. I believe, going back to this is an ethics, not an ethics issue, it is an ethics issue, however you want to phrase it. Again, it's a communication issue. Could have been communicated differently, rightly so. In retrospect, that's true. I don't feel like by what I've done has damaged this community. I don't believe that it has damaged the integrity of this council. If anything, I think I have tried in every regard to advance this community in every way possible. This being one of them. So I ask that you take careful consideration. I don't really know what Mr. Bernardo wants. I'm not sure if he wants to hang me from a tree. I don't know what he wants to do with me. But I think you really need to consider, like I said, if it really is an ethics violation or it's a communication issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I say one more thing?
It's closing argument, I would say no. You each want to close it. I'm sorry.
I understand that procedurally, Counselor, you have said that we should have a motion to dismiss and then go to a motion to find fault.
Right, it doesn't even have to be a motion to dismiss first. That was how it was at first.
What I'm suggesting is that's cumbersome and awkward. Okay, I suggest that rather we, as a jury would, enter into a period of deliberation
Okay,
and then cast one vote, whether or not a violation occurs.
understood.
Does that sound agreeable to all and
Yes.
to whom it applies?
Yes.
Gentlemen, lady, you agreeable? Okay. That being said, we are now in a deliberation status. Any preference to go first with thoughts or comments? If not, Mr. Goodall,
All right.
unless you need more time.
No,
Okay.
I need. It is bothersome for me that to say one represents the whole community and then exclude one whole group should not be a true representation of this city council. We should represent the whole community. And coming right out and admitting, yes, I did act on my own, but that is not a problem. It is a problem, in my eyes, to continually act on your own and not as a voice of this whole city council. Those are my problems, and it's obvious my understanding of what the ethics violation, as I understand it, and is maybe understood by others may differ. I do find that a violation of the ethics, that a person can, again, admit that they act on their own and then try to put it off that they represent the whole community when they openly admit that they exclude one whole group. That is not acting very ethically to me. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Mr. Lopez?
One of my thoughts was Mr. Rico made a comment that he wasn't ever warned before as part of his opening statement. I recall that we did have a meeting at one point when there was an agenda item about council interactions, and at that point I felt that was a warning that kind of got somehow, it was supposed to be how we all treated each other, but at that meeting he also asked for some latitudes as to how he conducts himself and wanted some, latitudes. And at that point, that's when the meeting kind of changed and pivoted to, well, you need to be a little bit more cognizant of the rest of the council. So I do want to say that I do feel like you were warned, and you stated in your opening statement that you weren't. So I just want to make that comment. I do feel that we are all trying to grab that brass ring to make Trinidad better. I think no one here wants Trinidad to do poorly. We all have the best intentions at heart, and sometimes as we're staring at that brass ring up there, we trip as we're walking because we have the best intentions in our mindset. I believe we all do. No one here is cognizant of the way we interact with each other as a board of members. With others' influence, and maybe, even though his intentions were true and for the best, this has kind of come back to bite him. And I'm sure you feel that way right now. I still think, though, that the rest of council should have been notified, if maybe not after the first meeting, but for sure by the second. And directly to me, this is something that's going on. And I can't speak on behalf of any of the others, but that's was never given me that information. I do feel that it is a challenge that if we may not have something directly in our code of ethics in regard that we're not being informed. That we have to have that trust that was brought up in the other mention of the, I don't know where it was, there was someone floating around here earlier. And I can see how Mr. Bernardo feels it was, if there was in fact a liaison office, it does say in our list of boards and members of such boards that there is no one listed or no phone number as there would be for the other members of any other board. So it does make me think, is there any way we can find that out quickly?
I don't know if I'm supposed to be.
No, I would think probably pass a minute. Your point is made. Thank you.
Okay. I do feel that the mayor was warned once before. That was before the June meetings took place. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Ms. Grego.
Well, I don't know what I would do if a general called and said, I want you to put him, gets the Pope calling and you're going to hell if you don't do this. No, just kidding. But, you know, I understand the position that you were put in. And it's not a good rule of thumb to do what was done with this meeting, not only to this community, but to this council. And that's all I have to say.
I appreciate the position that the mayor found himself in. I agree with Carlos, or Mr. Lopez, that I think that he was a pawn in a greater scheme, in a big chess game, who attempts to, if not manipulate, orchestrate things that are in his mindset. He repeatedly talked about the need to maintain those who are less supportive of this endeavor would not be made aware of it, which they were anyway, and therefore not included. But there has to be a yin to everything. I think KKK meetings are in secret. Open records exist for a reason. That's so that governing bodies can have integrity in anybody's eyes, most importantly our own. I think more than anything, it's a matter of to the bettering the city of Trinidad is admirable. And I thank you for all that you have done. Somebody commented about how we are better represented now than we have, at least in my experience here and my life experience, by mayors who have preceded you. Not that they were bad, it's just that you rise to a higher level, and I respect that. Point made?
Great point, mate.
Okay, I think you missed the point. In your presentation, that's a detail, and that you missed that point. You indicated that Jay was important, but you got to recognize he's not a resident. He's heavily involved, and he's a primary principal. He is not. We don't have as big a checkbook, but the way our system works, we are equally as important as is he. You talked about that the community was not damaged and the integrity was not damaged. The county reads about it, and they're going to read about it in the next couple editions of the paper. And it does not bode on us. It can't talk about it. So the point is, it's out there. So yes, it did damage the community. Camaraderie, the sense of team spiritedness, the sense of oneness among the seven of us. I think that the magnitude, you had an obligation to notify all of us before you did anything. It's one thing, you don't have to report every time you have a meeting from your youth detail they incorporate, because you're charged with that and you're doing a fine job. But when you're talking to a 4-star, well, however many star general, such national, international implication when you consider the military, to take it unto yourself is extremely narcissistic and maniacal in my mind. And it brings me back to war and otherwise, and your decisions to usurp the authority and the integrity of council do not serve you well. That's instilled in you and us by all the voters who put us in this position. I think that you do not have a malicious bone in your body. I think that you are well into the rest of us. To your point, sir, we all want to do our best to have Trinidad succeed, as was pointed out to me at the start, by what we do and how we're doing it, and the successes that we are enjoying. Rogue people doing it, because then we're not a team of horses pulling in one direction. My final point, and before I call the point for a question, is when I was appointed to council a few years ago, it was rife with suspicion, discord, hostility. We, as a council, have committed ourselves to work in relative harmony and cooperative spirit as a single unit for the greater good of the city and all of the citizens that we represent, and collaterally involved in our decisions. Those with us to regress to that dysfunctional former self that we were, and it will be detrimental to that which we all hold so dear to our hearts. And in the absence of any other comments or concerns, I'm going to... This ethics situation is extremely weak at best. It does nothing to address this concern or other concerns we have discussed, but we picked out the best of the worst in order to make it fit. In my opinion, I don't think something wrong happened. It just wasn't one of these. And something wrong can't continue to happen. Because we're going to look more foolish all the time on TV. When they buy a pizza from me, they want to know what the hell's going on here. And we got to do a better job of this. And it starts with you. You are the mayor. You're the team leader here. And you cannot abolish or ignore your team. So that having been said, I call the question, did there or did there not occur an ethics violation?
Meg, that's what I did this thing.
And are we required to act on the complaint as written referencing that site, or can we apply another?
Well, I would say the complaint...
You can't change charges in the middle of the
Right, that's
procedure.
right, that's right. I think that's
Thank
correct.
you.
But I would say also there's a general reference to the ethics.
I would think if it were criminal, you have to...
Alleges that he violated the code of ordinances. Now that's very broad and very general, and you could have a bill of particulars, but that is what the first paragraph says. And I tend to agree, but again, the first paragraph does say generally that he violated the code of ordinances. And it's later that he specifically says 2-71 subparagraph 4.
Okay, I'm holding in my mind the balance of what would be...
Each of you, I thought I gave each of you. Okay, we just want to make sure.
Mine have...
I understand. If anyone needs an extra...
Page 7,
Okay.
Roman numeral 2.
Okay.
Mind finding that?
I'm gonna.
It talks about it there, but there's another place also that talks
Okay.
about it.
It says you can amendment of complaint if a verified complaint contained in that complaint has occurred, amend the complaint upon its own motion to include such violations if the complaint is so amended by the board against within 48 hours.
No, and that is...
Before the fact, though.
Right, well, that's exactly my point, and that is what I'm corresponding to. So you can amend, and you could do that, but you have to do that in advance. So rather than entertain an amendment now, which I think is a little unfair, exactly, I would say that the complaint is broader.
This discussion makes our point.
Yeah.
We feel so adamant and so strong about what has occurred that we're doing what we can to find some damn rule you broke. I think you need to take seriously what our point is. You are not the king. This is not study hall, and you're not the monitor. And I can pass notes to her as I want. That having been said, I call the question, Mr. Goodall, did or did not an ethics violation occur?
I believe you need a motion. I think
Okay.
you still need a motion if there's...
I'm the king now. Is that a motion?
Yes.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay, are we all in favor of proceeding with a vote? Yes?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, the motion was a little unclear. I mean, so
Should we rephrase that then?
Yeah, we need.
Please, well, are you moving to dismiss or moving that the complaint has been
All right.
proven by a preponderance of the evidence?
I'll make a rinse of the evidence.
Is there a second to that motion that a complaint has been proven?
I will second.
Okay? Call it.
Goodall,
Yes.
Griego,
No.
Lopez,
Yes.
Matei,
No.
Yes, but the complaint, I don't think you need it. The complaint
Correct.
is not
That's
sustained.
done.
Right.
It fails at a 2-2.
Because of,
Well, there's nothing else you can do.
Okay.
So yes, you are.
all right, I'm hoping that like a phoenix, we can rise from the ashes of this crisis.
I could not agree more. I believe, well, we need to bring everybody back up. I mean, if we need any comments or whatever, but due process has been served, and it's important that we move forward from this point.
Yes, before we finish up, I just wanted to say that, I thank council for the participation. You brought forward to me, keep you more in the loop of things. Hindsight, like I said, is 20/20, and we do things sometimes, most of the time, different. So, motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second. Second. Call a vote.
Donato,
Yes. Thank you.
No.